Hey guys, what's up? It's Mr. Beerly. We're playing Assassin's Creed Origins. Today we're going to be using the discovery mode of this game to be exploring some of the sites of ancient Egypt, specifically the pyramids. So if we look at what our eagle friend sees below us, we see the pyramids of Giza. We're mostly going to be focusing on the middle pyramid. That is the oldest. That is the pyramid of Khufu, which is one of the oldest and the largest. But you'll notice that his pyramid is not the only one here. There are two other pyramids for two other pharaohs of Egypt. And there are also smaller pyramids in the complex. They kind of look like step pyramids, like each side of them is a set of steps. They're a lot smaller. These tombs were for the queens of Egypt who ruled alongside their husbands. It wasn't uncommon for pharaohs to have more than one wife. So there are a lot of these smaller pyramids in the Giza complex. You'll also notice some rectangles. They kind of look like little houses in the complex as well. These buildings were not for pharaohs or queens. These buildings were actually for nobles and members of the pharaoh's government, so high priests and people like that. And these people would also be buried here. They didn't get pyramids, but they did get tombs, and they would be buried in the complex as well. You'll also notice that the pyramids here, this game takes place a long time ago, but even when this game is taking place, the pyramids are already ancient. Now, if you look at the pyramids, you'll notice they look a lot different than they do today. This game takes place about 2,000 years ago, so even at this point, the pyramids of Giza were already ancient. Khufu's pyramid was built over 4,000 years ago. But even still, you'll notice differences. The pyramids are white. That's because when the pyramids were first built, they were actually covered with white limestone, and they had a little bit of gold at the very top. So the pyramids were actually very, very bright. Some people even claim that the light reflected off of them. Now this limestone, which is like this very nice stone for building, was slowly stolen over time and also wore away as the years passed on. So now the pyramids look the way they do today. A little less flashy, but still humongous. Now, as some of our friends mentioned in class, you'll notice that the pyramids are lined up in a certain way, and they also have a lot of straight lines, right? They're not kind of just stones stacked on top of each other. They look intentional. They have straight lines. And that is because Egyptian mathematicians and astronomers used the stars to line up the pyramids perfectly, almost perfectly. The bottom of each pyramid is almost a perfect square, which is unheard of in the ancient world. And the entrance, at least to Khufu's pyramid, opens facing north, toward the North Star, which Egyptian astrologists could study and identify. So the Egyptians are using math, they're using astronomy, and they're building things in a way that have never been built before, right? Most of the world at this time are still living in very simple huts, while the Egyptians are building this. Now, despite people's popular belief that the pyramids were built by a bunch of slaves, this is actually not true at all. The pyramids were built by regular Egyptians. think of it kind of like someone getting drafted for the military, right? When the growing season was over, when farmers didn't have that much work to do, the Egyptians would go to the farmers and say, hey, you've already harvested your crops. You have to wait a little bit so you can grow again. In the meantime, come work on the pharaoh's pyramid. And while you do that, we will pay you and we will give you a house and you can work on it for a couple months and then go back to your farm. So the pyramids, along with its other purposes, was kind of a way to keep farmers busy and keep them employed during the off-season. So the pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by Egyptian farmers, by workers. All right, now we're going to take our character and we are going to have a little peek inside the pyramids. Now, the first two places inside, so we're going to look inside Khufu's pyramid, so we're only going to look inside one of them. And the first place we're going to go to is the Grand Gallery, which is this large tunnel that goes right through the middle of the pyramid. We actually don't know what this was for. We think it might have just been a pathway that workers took so they could get inside the pyramid and actually work on it and get limestone inside. But we're still not certain. We think that it was used for lime because, as we'll see in a moment, the floor kind of has little slots in it to make it easier to slip stones in. So that's one of the reasons we think that. All right, the game talks a little bit, but that's okay. All right, so we're gonna go to the Grand Gallery. All right up ahead, you'll see the Grand Gallery. Now, despite its name, it's not super fancy, not a lot of paintings or anything. They just call it the Grand Gallery because it's this very large room. But you'll notice there are little slots for pushing in stones. And it's kind of like a big, long hallway. Now, I'll show you the map again. We're going to use the gallery to go first to the Queen's Chamber, right? Which is kind of in the middle of the pyramid, close to it's between the two other chambers we're going to explore. It's a bit of a tight squeeze to get in there, but we will manage. Now, despite being called the Queen's Tomb, we already know that the queens were buried in smaller pyramids in the Giza complex. So what was this room really for? Well, archaeologists, that is people who dig up and study ancient civilizations, originally thought that this other chamber must have been for the queen. But after investigating it further, archaeologists actually discovered that it was originally meant to be for Khufu, but then Khufu wanted his tomb more toward the center of the pyramid. So this room was abandoned. But it was closer, it was almost done, but yeah, they kind of abandoned it. You'll notice that there's a lot of broken stuff on the floor and the rooms are pretty empty. That's because even at this point, even just 2,000 years ago, a lot of these tombs and the pyramids were already robbed. So even at this point in history, most of the treasure has already been stolen. And can you imagine having to work on this and work in this tight little space? Ugh, I'm claustrophobic, I wouldn't like it. All right, next, we're going to go to Khufu's actual tomb. So to do that, we need to go up the Grand Gallery. And we'll go to Khufu's tomb itself. Now, the pyramids are amazing structures, but unfortunately, we don't see the art in the pyramids that we'll see in other tombs. That's because they were built so early, Egyptians hadn't really started doing this kind of art yet. So the walls were kind of blank and uninteresting, but there would have still been a lot of treasure in them when they were first built. And it really is amazing that they could even move these huge stones without any modern machinery. So this would have been Khufu's tomb, this room. And right ahead of us is his sarcophagus. We're going to walk up to that in a second. And that's where his body would have been laid. When archaeologists first got into the pyramids, Khufu's body was already gone. It was stolen along with most of his treasure. But that's where his body would have been, his mummified body, ready to go to the afterlife. All right, so we are going to leave Khufu's tomb. The next place we're going to go, I'll show you on the map, is the subterranean level. Subterranean means underground, and I'll talk to you about why that's important in just a minute. Okay, now we're going to venture into the last chamber that we know of in Khufu's pyramid, the subterranean. Now, Khufu's pyramid is pretty interesting because most pharaohs were buried in subterranean chambers. So chambers actually underneath the pyramid. But for some reason, Khufu decided he didn't want this. He wanted to be buried at the center of the pyramid. So just like the Queen's Chamber, the subterranean chamber is unfinished. Another reason for them not finishing this chamber, and maybe why they stopped doing them, is because this subterranean chamber is so low underground that there's actually less oxygen in the subterranean chamber. It's actually very difficult to breathe down here, which is one of the reasons why if you visit the pyramids of Giza today, you actually cannot visit the subterranean chamber. It's considered unsafe for this reason, that there's not enough air. But yeah, most pharaohs were buried under the ground. Khufu wasn't. Now we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. So if you look at where our character is now, there's really nothing around here. No settlements, no cities, no pyramids. It's kind of just a random spot at the Nile. But this place is very important. Today we know it as the Valley of the Kings. You see, as we talked about earlier, the pyramids were robbed. They were emptied of all their treasure because guards could be bribed and everyone knew where their pyramids were. They were easy to find. So Egyptians started hiding the tombs of their pharaohs and nobles and queens and sealing them where no one could find them. Today we found a lot of the tombs, and right now we're exploring just one. Now, one thing you'll notice is that even though the Egyptians have stopped building these great big grand pyramids, one thing they've gotten better at is their art and hieroglyphics. In these tombs, we start to see illustrations of gods, pharaohs, daily life in Egypt, animals, all sorts of things, as well as hieroglyphics. We'll talk more about hieroglyphics a little bit later in the tour, but basically, they are a form of picture writing, kind of like cuneiform, but a bit different. And as we see, this tomb as well was still robbed. Even though the Egyptians were hiding the tombs, a lot of times workers would leak information to tomb robbers, or tomb robbers would get lucky and find them. So even though this tomb has some stuff left, it has also been robbed, just like the pyramids. Tombs could also be pretty big. They could be multiple rooms, not quite the same way as pyramids, but they could still be pretty large and impressive. right? And here we're seeing some tiny statues of gods. Because remember, Egyptians are buried with everything they need for the afterlife. So even though this tomb's been robbed, we still see some items that this pharaoh would have wanted to be buried with. The statues of gods might come to life in his afterlife. These pots, weapons, all of these are things that the Egyptians believed he would need in the afterlife. And it looks like in this particular tomb, we have some other mummies. It might be the pharaoh's family, or other people he was close to in life. We also see some statues of Roman gods. This is where we learn a lot about Roman religion. All right, and I think we're going to head out now, and we are going to move on to a last part of our tour, which will teach us about hieroglyphics. Okay, the last part of our tour is going to be exploring Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now, just like in Mesopotamia, as this statue shows us, ancient Egyptians had scribes, a class of people whose job it was to read and write, because most people couldn't. And the scribes would become masters of hieroglyphics. Now, a lot of these drawings of people we see around are just that. These are illustrations of people. These themselves are not the hieroglyphics. But these drawings that we find in tombs do teach us a lot about daily life in ancient Egypt, ancient Egyptian religion, and also who different kings and queens were. However, hieroglyphics is still a form of picture writing. A lot of hieroglyphic symbols resemble birds, animals, tools, or even people in some cases. Okay, so as we walk up here, right, we're still getting a look at art, but we're going to get a closer look at hieroglyphics. It's a lot different than Mesopotamian cuneiform. Now here we're going to get a closer look at some hieroglyphics. And as you see, there are many small symbols. Now, hieroglyphics for a long time were difficult to translate. And what we later discovered is, unlike our writing, where we read left to right, hieroglyphics can be read in many different directions, depending on how you're looking at how you're looking at the piece of paper, the tablet, or where the writing is. So for a while, we actually didn't know how to read hieroglyphics. We did eventually figure it out, and one of the reasons for that is the Rosetta Stone, which we're going to see in a little bit. First, we'll look at some more examples of hieroglyphs. There's an example of hieroglyph writing. Again, it looks a lot like pictures. And each one has a different meaning, or sometimes even a different sound. All right, here's another. We have a drawing, but we also have an example of hieroglyphics here. Again, different symbols. It could literally just be a sound. Just like we have letters like A for A and B for B. Here is a good example of how many hieroglyphic characters there were. You guys, there's not that many letters in the alphabet. There's over 700 signs in hieroglyphics. That's why being a scribe was a full-time job. Very difficult to learn all that. Right? So if you were a scribe, that would be your job. You'd go to school just to learn how to read and write, because most people couldn't. Now here we have the Rosetta Stone, and this is why we understand ancient Egyptian writing. If you look at the Rosetta Stone, it's actually written in 3 different languages. It was a royal announcement. Now, 2 of the languages we already knew how to speak, and they said the exact same thing. So we figured the third language spoken must be saying the same thing as the first two. And it's because of that that we figured out how to read and write hieroglyphics. So it's really a very important discovery. And of course, these hieroglyphics paint tomb walls, and it's how we learn so much of ancient Egyptian history. I hope you guys enjoyed this tour. I thought it might be more interesting than reading another article. Make sure to answer all the questions, and all right, that concludes our tour.